Welcome to this edition of Audit Tuesday GRC podcast. Joining us today is Steve Shaw, founder of Shaw Financial Growth and an experienced CFO. I am Garret Grajek, your host. So today we're going to be talking about the CFOs, Chief Financial Officers, evolving role in cybersecurity, compliance, audit readiness, board reporting, and managing risk. Okay? Let's jump into it. Welcome, Steve.
Garret, thanks. Glad to be here. This is the stuff that I live every week with my clients, so I've been looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah, I heard Steve at a symposium when we both went in Hollywood a little while ago. Yes, we're all from LA, or at least the LA area around here. And I was like, oh, this is a no-brainer. Because usually the podcast is real technical. We get real nitty-gritty on audit and extracting data and what data to achieve and how to report it. This one, we're going to go a little high level and basically understand the mechanics around the audit, why they must be done, and then who's involved and how the CFO's involved. And I don't think all our techies know this, so this is good. Anyways, Steve, why don't you go into your background? Okay.
And I sure hope we don't get into the code line writing and the details, because I'll make stuff up, but you're not going to like the answer. So
good deal.
I have a little bit over 30 years of financial leadership, mostly in the technology and SaaS space, a little bit of manufacturing. And most recently, I was a CFO of an AI video surveillance company. And we built the security protocol that was international. So we dealt with GDPR. We had big manufacturing clients, and so we needed to be SOC 2 compliant. We went from pre-revenue, ultimately sold the business, and helped stay through the transition into a bigger company. So getting to see a lot of how this risk and cyber security plays, especially as you move between companies. Since then, I've been working with Shaw Financial Growth, where I'm a fractional CFO, and I basically get with small to mid-sized companies and help them with their strategy, with their governance, with their audit readiness, just not without the full-time price tag. Founders, boards, investors, teaching is what I really, really enjoy. So, and what you'll hear today, my operating philosophy is that the CFO needs to be a strategic business partner, not Dr. No. Most of you IT folks are, think as having to go into the CFO's job as the pain in the neck or the trouble. My job is not to block risk. It's to make sure that everybody understands the risk, we take it on purpose, and then what we get out of that from a business perspective.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into it. So cybersecurity, Steve, was always considered, and that's like this podcast, an IT issue. Now, our CFOs, have you seen in your career, so 30 years, et cetera, have you seen CFOs spending more and more time thinking about cybersecurity? And of course, like you said, this company wants to sell the product. So, compliance. Is that more of your day job?
Absolutely. The point here is that cyber risk at various stages throughout the recent history has become financial risk, and it really walked through in three different ways. One is regulators, right? Cyber incidents are disclosure events. Materiality is a finance judgment, so that's what sits at my desk. Secondly, auditors. Every financial audit today digs into IT controls, access, segregation of duties. You do not get through an audit without owning the conversation of where your IT controls are. And then, as you just mentioned, the third place is customers, right? When you're a SaaS company or you're a technology company and you're working with enterprise deals, SOC 2 security is utmost concern, and you've got to jump through your customers' security compliance in order to be able to get the deal. So security somewhere along the line stopped being overhead, and it really became cost of sales. And then ultimately, when something breaks, the board doesn't ask the firewall what it costs, right? The board asks the CFO what it costs: revenue, cash, insurance, customer trust, all of those things are financial questions. So ultimately, cyber risk is financial risk. And I don't need to become a security engineer, but the numbers, the audits, and all the deals run through security now.
That's good. That's good. So as the CFO, what are the, like, in your, what you've seen, the biggest compliance and cyber mistakes companies make? But I want to break it out into two parts. Your enterprise companies where you've worked as a CFO, what are the mistakes they make? But then also contrast that to the mistakes where you're working a lot now, the emerging technology companies. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let me start with the second part, just because it's the most relevant
sure.
right now. The biggest issue that small companies have is deferral. Every mess that you get called into traces back to the same decision, which is, we'll deal with compliance later. Let's focus on growth, right? If you've got to make a decision between, do I do something to grow the company, or do I do something to make the company compliant? The default decision is always go to growth. The problem is that when you do then finally get that big customer, that investor, the auditor, the cleanup that it takes is multiples of what it would have cost to do it on at first, right? Beginning patterns, everybody has access to everything. What was convenient with 10 people in the company, you grew to 100 people and you didn't take time to revisit it. Now you're moving on, and now you're 250, 500, 1,000 people, and all of a sudden, reconciliations are behind, diligence requests. You're trying to recreate the history, and that's what becomes a problem.
I have to jump in on that one because we do identity controls here at YouAttest, and I always say my best experience of understanding how identity is actually parceled out was the beginning of my career. I worked the help desk, and my job was to be yelled at. You got to give me access, or I can't get this report out today, and we're not going to make the number. The board's going to have your blah blah blah. You know what I mean? That was how some people got access.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And it's legitimate. You need to figure out how to get people the right access, but it needs to be done in the right way, in a disciplined manner, right? At the end of the day,
question, of course, is what is the control that your enterprise has to review all of those changing privileges, right? And that is, part of the SOX audit, part of the HIPAA audit, it's part of all the GDPR, et cetera. But if you don't have that control mechanism, because the natural state of identity is to expand.
Exactly.
Privilege creep. So that's 2 cents on identity. All right, I have to follow up on that question on the bigger companies. What kind of mistakes do they make in the compliance world? And
I think a lot of times that they are focused too much on segregating the risk, right? Once you become this big company, you try and silo everything, and you want to isolate the piece here, and you want to isolate a piece here, and you want to isolate a piece over here. And at the end of the day, what ends up happening is you have multiple control environments that are not consistent with each other and don't communicate well with each other. And that causes a couple of problems. One, from a financial problem, your inefficient spend, because you're potentially double or triple paying for things, or investing in areas that you didn't need to. But secondly, from a technological perspective, when you have different systems that aren't talking well to each other, it ends up actually being counterproductive, and they end up becoming weaker because one's not playing off of the other.
Yeah. I think interoperability becomes a real problem in the in the larger institutions that I've seen. That you're getting, as you called segregated. We use the word siloed data here, siloed reports here, and we're not going to get into the aggregate of what we're actually seeing. All right, here's a question at the board level, and the CFO is part of. How do you see them decide what's the right amount for cybersecurity and governance? And I'm not looking for percentages, but how do you see those decisions made, rightly or wrongly, in your experience?
It's funny you asked for a percentage, and And that's the secret sauce, is that there is no right percentage.
Yeah, that's what I always say. When I hear someone say that, it's a 4.2%, I'm like, oh, come on. You know?
Yeah, no. If you put control and compliance on a spectrum, right? You could be at zero risk, right? Where you lock everything down and you get to a point where there's zero risk. You can do that. And your company does nothing. It has no ability to grow. It has no ability to expand. And you end up just kind of floundering around. Flip side is you can take a completely wild perspective and have no controls. And you go hog wild and everything seems hunky and dory until all of a sudden wheels start falling off and somebody, typically me, ends up in jail. And so,
yes.
So the right thing is that you got to figure out what is right for your company. And I even got to experience this in my most recent acquisition. Our company, as a small startup company, was willing to take a risk profile of something, let's call it greater than 50%. And the company that acquired us was a much bigger company and had a much more established and older, framework, and had a much lower risk tolerance. And so reconciling those things are good. The important thing is that the leadership team, the CEO, the board, the executive team, and all of the management talks about what they're doing. They make a risk profile decision intentionally. You understand why you're making that risk profile, and you speak about it openly. And so then everybody understands where you are and why you're in that position, because ultimately then you can manage it, right? How much is the downtime going to cost us? What is the contractual exposure on our customer data? What cyber insurance policy do you need? All of these kind of things, those are answerable questions, very simple to deal with. But in order to be able to get to that point, you have to have made the decision about what risk you're willing to take.
And to follow up on that question, did you ask those questions of the CISO or if there wasn't one, to the director of security or director of IT before the meetings, or were these asked during the board meetings? Or I'm just curious where you got your information to help you, give your thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah. So generally this was done at the management strategic level. So whatever strategic framework you're using, whether you're using, there's a couple of different strategic frameworks that you're using, or if you're just meeting on a monthly or quarterly or daily or weekly, whatever cadence you're using, the management team needs to have these questions. And that is the CFO's job, is to work with their IT professionals, work with their board, or work with their management team first before the board, to talk about what we want to do and why. Do you want to be SOC 2 compliant? Yes or no? There's advantages and disadvantages to that. The compliance and the tracking and the management is burdensome, but there are customers that you can't have if you're not, right? Or you want to be ISO 27001, or how do you want to go through these processes? Do you want to, and I'll probably start talking over my head now, do you want to have this firewall or this one? Do you want to have a physical one or virtual one? Do you want to host things yourself, or do you want to outsource those? All of those decisions have benefits and costs, and the management team needs to understand those and then put that together for the board on, these are the decisions that we've made and why.
Yeah, and there's nothing more relevant you said, is it? Because I've been involved in a few, and so have my customers, where the way the risk acceptance factors were okay at an emerging company, and then the buyout comes, or a usage of a much larger customer, and they look at the practices and they say, you're not there. You're not there. And I know of one that a guy became actually an investor of this company because his deal almost fell through based on compliance.
And if you're looking at an M&A deal like that, it absolutely can happen, right? The acquirer can look at this and say, there's just too much risk here, and it's just, I can't price that in. I can't lower the price enough to make it viable that we're willing to take that risk.
Okay, no question. So when you're preparing a company for an audit, in your different organizations you've been through, what in your mind it sticks out between the ones that, wow, we always had rough audits in this company, but in this enterprise, our audits sailed through, or at least as much as they could? What were the main differences of the, just not just the personnel? Was it just the prep? Was it the tools? What were the factors you saw?
I think the biggest point here is that your audit readiness needs to have a regular discipline, and whether that's
Nice.
whatever cycle you're on, whether you're most companies use a monthly close process, but whether it's a monthly or a quarterly review, but you need to treat audit readiness as part of your standard process, your standard discipline. If you're closing your books every month, your process, your documentation of your processes, your evidence is being captured real time.
Good point.
There's named owners, all of these things. It all has to be part of it. The ones that struggle are the ones that are doing archaeology, right? When all of a sudden now you're trying to go back and recreate history, or you're trying to produce that evidence that you didn't capture at the time.
I talked to an auditor, and that's what, just by the way, so a plug, that's what YouAttest does. It gives you the identity evidence for your audits, the identity of who has access to who, what the changes were, all that is. So when the auditors come, you go, here's your documents, and you away. I talked to an auditor, and well, it was about last year, but it's still, they were starting to do ISO 42001 AI audits. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I go, how are those going? She goes, I don't know. Outside of just basically the enterprise is making up the data, it's going great. Like you said, forensic, they're going back. Okay, who approved of this policy? They don't know, right? Yep. Who approved of the users that were getting access to it? They don't have any record of that. Who is the people that are in charge of the retraining of the models? They don't have any evidence. So if you're going back in time and having to create, who is access, who's approved, then it becomes almost a fantasy project.
Yep, and a lot of times it's not even relevant. The important part is not the reasons why. It purely is, audits are won and lost right now by access, right? Who had access to what, who approved it, and when was it reviewed, right? If you can answer those three questions and you have evidence of it, you're way ahead of most.
Can you give those three again?
Yep. It's who has access,
who
approved it, and when was it last reviewed.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's great. That is, and it's true, and that's how this was when we was talking about the ISO 421. There was no document of that. There's no document of that at every step. The policy, the data collection, the algorithm review, and then the final production. Yeah. Okay, so here's the question. Now, so in these successful audits, who actually owns the process? Is it yourself, the CFO? Is it committee? Is it Garret? This is our GRC practitioner. This is an outsourced company we use. Who owns this?
That's so who owns the compliance side?
Yes.
I think this is changing, honestly. I think AI is driving a little bit of a change here. Historically, I would say it absolutely does fall within the IT organization, but with reporting responsibility into the CFO. So the CFO needs to understand and have proof of it, right? Because they need to be able to quantify the risk and be able to access that information when going through the audit. But ultimately, the systems and the process is something that needs to be owned by that IT organization, ultimately, in my opinion. Now, where I say things are changing is AI, right? AI is becoming more and more relevant here. And I honestly believe that most companies now need to have almost an AIT or an AI officer, or some maybe an officer is too big of a word, but
no.
They need to have an one person in the company that's dedicated to managing how AI is deployed and how it's used within a company and where that fits within that control mechanism. Because AI changes so frequently, a lot of times your policies and procedures that you're used to doing, a big company, we have our board wheel, right? One quarter out of every year, we address, risk profiles, and we look at our, and you go through and you want to update your policies and procedures. Legal gets in, writes the whole new policy updates, presents it to the board approves it, 3 months later it's published, and then it sits on the shelf for another year. That's fine, and a necessary process. But when you're trying to adapt AI, and AI models are changing daily, hourly, weekly, whatever you want to call it, you can't rely on a policy that you instituted a year ago to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think that you make some good points. So, because ISO 4201 is pretty prescriptive on AI and what are the actions you should have and all that. The NIST AI RMF, Risk Management Framework, really does have a lot in there about you as a company, you as a board. What are you owning? What are you doing? And since NIST is American and most listeners of this are American, I think it's pretty relevant to our start understanding what are the board ownerships and the corporate ownerships of the actions around AI. Because I mean, they're in the AI framework is basically spelling out that yes, we're responsible. And I'm just saying, given your past and all this, you see how NIST will write something, it's their recommendations, and then voila, it just shows up in a law 5-10 years from now. So,
well, and we don't need to go down a rabbit trail of AI, but the hard part is things are changing from a risk management profile with AI
right.
so quickly, and it's hard to keep up with that, right? Companies that use AI, I think I mentioned this in our meeting that we had a few weeks ago, Garrett. Companies that use AI in their interaction with their customers at all, we're having court proceedings now where courts are enforcing the company to be liable to whatever AI has said, even if AI was completely wrong. If they made a product up that doesn't exist and said, hey, customer, buy this product, courts are now enforcing that the company has to honor that and figure out a way to deliver that product, which may not even exist sometimes. So the risk profile is changing quick with AI.
That's really, really good points on that. Okay. Yeah, because one of my questions was literally, do we see AI helping the CFOs, or do we see it is what you've been stating? AI is a new risk that the team has to quantify and have to understand how they are actually managing this. Whether they come up with, I heard one call it an ACO, AI chief officer, whatever, to understand. And I do like what you said, is because there's so many things in AI. Where is AI being used? Can your company actually quantify where it's used? Then the first, I say, real regulation around AI came from our friends in the EU, which is their EU AI Act, where they said, okay, what we're going to have to start with is that you should know what AI you're deploying, and you should be able to classify it as dangerous or not. So it's like a first step in saying, yeah, you can't manage what you can't measure, et cetera, et cetera. You can't measure what you can't manage. You have to quantify it. So that seems like a good step one for enterprises, to at least understand what AI they're using, and then document what it is, and understand the risk involved.
Yeah. So got all kinds of. Let me try and make sure that I can my thoughts together on that, because I have a lot to say on this topic. The help of AI is real, right? Faster, especially even from the CFO's perspective, faster closing, better forecasting, anomaly detection. First drafts of analyses that used to take days take minutes, right? So AI is super relevant, and you can make rather than, most people look at AI, at least most finance folks, let me say it that way. Most finance folks look at AI as a way to be more efficient, save money, right? How do I take my 10 people down to 8 or something like that? I think really the right answer is, how do you make your 10 people act like 20 or 15 or something like that, right? How do you increase the value and the efficiency rather than explicitly extract cost out? Now, there's cost savings to be had too, so don't get me wrong, but the right answer is to lean in diligently, right? And like I said earlier, the CFO's job is risk management, not risk elimination, right? So we need to figure out where things are okay and where things are not. Anything that touches reported numbers or a material decision has to have human review, right? Full stop. AI can be confidently wrong, right? And confidence and wrong is a horrible combination in financial reporting, right?
Good point.
You need to know your audit trail, and you need to know where it came from. So there's balances, but one of the things that I think is the biggest risk is what I kind of call shadow AI, right? And this is kind of the rogue nature of people, or when the company says, this is our tool, use it, and everybody else is messing around with ChatGPT, or they're messing with Claude, or they're doing whatever their brother told them about last night at the family dinner. All of a sudden, they're starting to put company data into these other tool sets because they don't know how to use what the company has provided, and then that is risk that you can't handle, right? You can't handle it because you can't manage risk that you don't know. And if it's all going out the door some other way, that's what you don't know. So the important thing, I think, is we'll talk a little bit more about it. Hopefully we'll get to this, is culture, but ultimately it's training, right? If you're going to focus on whatever tool set is comfortable for your company, primarily because you've initiated a contract with them and you have a control around how the data is being used, you need to have a good process into train your people so everybody can get everything that they need out of it using that tool. So they don't feel inspired to go try something else that sounds cooler or sexier or something, because they have the ability to do everything that they need to do in the environment that you do. And if you train them properly, there's also an added benefit from my perspective, because then the spend is efficient, right? They're actually using the tool set the way that it's supposed to be, not on an ad hoc basis and wasting tokens or whatever the cost driver is there. Yeah.
And I'm going to turn a statement then into a question for you with the analogy, because one of the things we've seen in AI governance at YouAttest is one of our customers, their auditor said, you have to start, this is the auditor talking to the company, they're in healthcare, you have to start by quantifying every identity that AI is using, and then quantify not only the privileges of that identity, but the heartbeat that is associated with that identity. So you can, like you said, AI is not responsible. The company is responsible, right? Mm-hmm. So that was step one in their operations. And I just got off a demo of that and all on 9 yards. And this is that the AI itself had to be quantified with the heartbeat, so someone held responsible and accountable for that. Now, there's something that you hear talked about, and I wanted you to extrapolate on this, is, well, there's no real American regulation on AI. And I'm like, well, we just had that huge law case here in LA around social media, and there's no law. I know pretty much of the NIST standards, 800, 171, 207, 53. There's no NIST standard on social media yet. There was a huge lawsuit, and I'm sure things were paid that we don't know about, right? Now, I kind of feel the same way about AI. We're responsible. There's guidelines and there's guidances. How do you feel? What is the liability of AI, given that there's no law, but companies are still responsible for the cyber. So
Absolutely. Yeah. That's always the hard part with evolving standards, right?
Yes.
We had it back when Sarbanes actually was first coming out, and we had it when revenue recognition changed, and everyone started having to restate financials. There was no law around that, but all of a sudden, you start seeing SEC lawsuits, and you start seeing people,
Exactly.
having vague law on contractor versus employee, right? And all of a sudden, you get all kinds of lawsuits around employment classifications and the like, right? So in every one of these kind of evolutions of business risk, right, the liability precedes the law, and so that's one of the conscious decisions that you need to make and figure out how to make.
I'm going to say that again for my own brain. The liability precedes the law.
A lot of times, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
So,
and that's what we should remember about AI.
That's what we're seeing now, right? There's no law against having having AI tell your customer something, but if it tells your customer something wrong, you're liable for that.
Got it.
And now there's new problems also, or challenges to that, right? I used to be comfortable in managing risk within an environment because I can buy insurance. At the end of the day, I can buy X amount of insurance, and how much I buy and what the limits are, it depends on what I assess the risk. But I can get comfortable that my risk is managed by insurance. The problem is nowadays people have to start looking at their E&O and cyber policies, because sometimes companies are starting to exclude AI out of those policies. It's almost like, for those of us in Southern California, right? Earthquake insurance was a big thing. It used to be covered in your homeowner's insurance, and then somewhere along the lines, companies said, "Oh, we're losing everything on homeowner or on earthquake, so that's not going to be included anymore. And now you need to buy separate earthquake insurance." It's starting to move that way in the insurance space with cyber, that AI obligations sometimes are starting to get carved out of these policies now. And I would assume that there's going to be something that comes on the back end of this, which is an AI specific policy that is going to be a lot more expensive probably. But
this is a great discussion, and we might even have you back on a panel discussing AI and governance. We were talking about compliance and bringing the IT teams in the board and the CFO teams. What advice you have after your 30 years experience of bringing teams together on these compliance tasks? How did you organize? How did it make sure that I think the worst, as you stated, is the auditor shows up and then you start, right? Right. So how did you organize that?
So I'm going to give you an answer, and it's going to sound kind of contrite or not contrite, but what's the right word to use here? Overly simplistic. But the answer here is building the culture, right? You have to have built your culture properly. There's systems and policies. You need to have those go into place. But from my perspective, culture is the compensating control, right? It's what allows you to actually know what's happening real time to mitigate it before it lands, right? You need to have a culture that the employees trust that the leadership team is doing the right thing and making the right decisions. And when they say, this is the tool set to use, this is the tool set that they believe that they need to use, and that they've been properly trained and supported in order to use it properly. Same thing, that the management team feels comfortable that the operating team is doing what they're supposed to do, and that they're communicating properly back and forth, right? Because at the end of the day, like I said, the hardest part is you cannot control what you do not know.
Yeah.
Right? Culture is the compensating control that lets you tell what's happening, right? So across all of these silos, across all of these different departments, having transparent culture where people feel heard and where people feel understood, allows them to feel comfortable to communicate. And when they don't, they keep it in, and that's where bombs are hiding that you don't know.
I like it, and that it kind of ties into the question: what's the bit of advice for CFOs and CEOs? And it sounds like you're saying is build a culture of communication. But I have to ask, in that culture of communication, where does automation and tools fall in? Does it listening to the person who assigned it, saying, "Dude, you're killing me. I'm doing my Saturdays, Sundays with spreadsheets or whatever. I need a tool." Where does the factoring, the budgeting of the proper tools to actually conduct these come in? Where does that come in?
That's a part of your business planning process, and it absolutely has to be part of it. I hinted towards it earlier. AI is here, right? It's absolutely part of your business. Either you are planning to use it and managing it, or it's being used without your knowledge within the business.
Good point.
So
Right.
it's here. You don't get to opt out of it. So you need to figure out how to manage it properly. So it absolutely needs to be part of your budget allocation. Automation, you absolutely need to leverage all of, it's a little bit hard, right? We get into this world. You guys are risk man, or you guys are cybersecurity, right? So cyber threats and compliance, and so you guys are the ones that are standing on the wall yelling and screaming about every single little thing that's heading your way that may or may not have any sort of true impact. I'm on that same fence, right? Trying to manage the profile or manage the risk. But it's not all bad, right? There are a lot of good that come out of these automation tools, and we have to leverage them, right? Because we're going to have to spend more money on these tool sets and the compliance side of things in order to make them work. And so we need the whole rest of the business to be a little bit more efficient to be able to free up those funds. So it absolutely needs to be part of your budget profile. There needs to be, like we said earlier, there needs to be somebody in charge of these tool sets that's managing the compliance, that's managing the policy, but also managing the budget and implementation, probably the training, how it's deployed around the company. And so they should have their own budget allocation. The other thing that happens, I would say, in the short term, right, when we were talking about this year and over the next quarters, months and quarters, where maybe you didn't have the right budget set up to handle things at first. Hopefully, in a perfect world, your company has some sort of allocation that's a CEO discretion allocation that's generally used for business opportunities or new development or new concepts. But this can be a feature that changes the direction of a company. And so I think that this is a great use of any for that kind of contingency fund that gets put aside to be able to invest in tools or manage the audit process of these tool sets to make sure that you.
I have to ask this completely selfish question. Did you see the budgeting opening up for tools before the audit or after everyone just finagled and failed during the audit? Where did you see?
You're gonna make me be honest here, huh?
Yeah, right.
I would love to say that us as finance folks saw this coming and planned for it, and we were way ahead of it. The answer to that is no. Even if we did have folks on our teams, maybe on the IT side of things, yelling and screaming up front that we needed to do there. At the end of the day, when the allocation axe fell, more often than not, that got cut because it wasn't an immediate priority.
They had to touch the stove. Yeah. It's all good. All right, Steve, great conversation. Any final thoughts for our audience?
I think this is it, right? I already said it. The genie's out. The people are going to use AI. You need to work with your CFOs to manage risk, not eliminate it. So lean in, be diligent about it. Make sure that you're communicative, right? Whatever policies, whatever plan, whatever risk allocation you're willing to take, make sure that everyone understands it. You fund it properly, you train, and you build a culture that allows you to tell the truth. That's what starts getting.
I think that's really what I got out of this is that if it starts with your culture, if you're not communicative, like in many ways that this is a problem, or we need these tools, or we're going to fail in this audit. If that people can't say it until they touch a stove, you're going to have some pretty ugly, cyber instances and compliance instances. Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
Garret,
And how can people?
That's super fun. I appreciate you having me.
How can people get a hold of you?
Easiest way, my website, shawfg.com. Or you can search me on LinkedIn, Steve Shaw, Fractional CFO. If you're a founder or, need C-level help with finance or audit readiness or any of the risk topics that we kind of talked today, I'd love to have the conversation with you. And
this is Steve, because that's how I talked to him. I met him at a conference, said hello, and he just started talking. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're a no-brainer for this episode.
I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but okay.
Oh, yeah. Easy to talk to. That's a gift in our community. And here at YouAttest, you struggling with identity governance and GRC and user access reviews. That's what we do. Call us or write us at info@youattest.com or just ping me on LinkedIn. All the best, everyone. Till next time.